Good evening, Tanzania. Good evening, Burkina Faso. And good evening, Namibia. This is Report Desk Africa, where you not only get to see some of the big stories in Africa, but this week you also get to hear the backstory and the circumstances surrounding these stories. My name is Blessings Musugu, and I am not alone.
And I am Ni Omoni, and on today's program, we will be staying here in Nigeria, where the death of two teenagers have sparked outrage as a result of bullying. We will be right back. Do stay with us. Okay, so we're going to be discussing a lot of things today, but majorly the case of bullying. Of course, the producer is going to play a report now. Then after that, we are going to discuss more and dissect the issue of bullying, especially two cases of teenagers who died as a result of bullying in Nigeria.
The internet was sent into a frenzy on 30th November 2021 after the news surrounding the controversial death of Sylvester Oromoni, a 12-year-old boy from South Extraction in Nigeria, came to light. Sylvester, a student of Hundeyin College situated in Lekki, a suburb of Lagos State in the southwest region of the country, was allegedly beaten to death by senior students of the school after his refusal to join a cult group. The parents' account and that of a child from the same school corroborate the allegation.
The boy could not stand. The boy could not eat. The boy is shouting my mouth, my waist, my back, my chest, everywhere. It was on Monday between the hours of 11 and 12. That was when he started confessing. He told us that he didn't play ball. He didn't go to any field. That he was in his room with his mates, sleeping on his bed. They walked into their room, they put off the lights, they beat him, then he fell from his bed. They started mashing with a leg.
He was my friend. Before Sly started complaining of leg pain, he told me he had muscle pull. So I carried him, me and his best friend Alex, we carried him to the sick bay. We brought food from me from the cafeteria.
The one that they came to pick 5 o'clock with convoy now is one of the bad boys that beat him up.
Yes.
And the parent knows what child means. They came to pick their own.
Yeah,
and they did not train the boy very well.
I think they say one of the boys jumped fence and ran out of school.
Sequel to the ugly incident, the Lagos State government ordered the indefinite closure of the school as it currently begins investigation into the matter. The student's death has, however, continued to generate widespread criticism on social media platforms, leading to numerous demands including the hashtag Justice for Sylvester. The parents of one of the alleged culprits have denied claims of their son's involvement, while the school has released a statement pledging to support the police investigation. Will justice eventually take its course? Will the perpetrators of these heinous acts be brought to book? These and other questions are on the lips of many. Time, they say, will tell. Ni Omoni, News Central.
And that was the case of 12-year-old Sylvester Oromoni in Lagos, Nigeria, who attended Hundeyin College and was allegedly bullied to death. Now, this is just one of the very few cases that have come up during the time. There's another case of Karen Makpok, who also was bullied at that time but didn't make the limelight, and that is what we are focusing on today. Bullying is becoming a very big issue.
Yes, and it has become a cause for concern.
Yeah, it is because back when I was in primary school, I remember there was a kid out there's always constantly being bullied. I meet them in the bathroom, beating him up, taking his lunch and so many things. I didn't experience that because maybe I would say I had it better, because immediately I got to the secondary school, I was handed over to an ed boy who was my school father. But these days it has become a very, very big issue.
I think it has always been an age-long thing, but now it's becoming more life-threatening than it used to be, and it's something that should, raise concern.
And this cuts across everybody. It affects everybody. And truth be told, we've all experienced bullying one way or the other, either as the victim or as the bully. In fact, in a study conducted, it was reported that almost 4 in every 5 participants, that is 78%, reported being bullied, and 85% of the children admitted to bullying others at one point. So today on Report Desk Africa, we'll be looking at this unhealthy culture of bullying and addressing the many questions left hanging in our minds. And joining us to analyze the many issues raised by these happenings is journalist David Hundeyin. And of course, we're expecting a freelance editor, Mike Ekunno, in the course of the show.
Yes, but in the meantime, thank you for joining us, David.
Hi, David. So, David, you broke the case of Karen Hapog and you brought it to limelight, a case of a 14-year-old girl who schools in Abuja Premier Academy, to be precise, and died of sepsis. Now, for those who don't know, sepsis is an inflammation of the body caused by an infection. Now, you broke the case. Now, these two cases happened in the school, which poses the question of whether schools are losing their primary responsibility of adequately looking out for the children. David, is there any truth in this?
Well, first of all, I'll just quickly point out that technically I didn't actually break the story. The story came out in June and it has actually received quite a bit of coverage. But the school in question, that's Premier Academy in Abuja, did a very good job of suppressing the story. The school actually went out and hired an expensive PR agency called PR Redline to sort of control the narrative up until recent. So it wasn't until I went out and independently covered the story in the manner that I do, then they weren't able to control the narrative anymore, and that's how I was getting this coverage. Now, specifically in this case, it's very fair to say that the school has absolutely not lived up to its responsibility of care to its students. If for nothing else, for the fact that a 14-year-old girl has died in this horrific manner, right, in your school, and what you are most concerned about in the immediate aftermath of her death is how to ensure that things keep on moving normally. Students keep on paying their school fees, lessons go on. There's zero attempt to cooperate with the authorities, to speed up, to expedite the investigation, to find out what has happened. Has there been a systemic failing here? What exactly is it that has happened here? There's no attempt to do that. Everybody's trying to move on quickly, right? So that tells any observer that the first priority of the school is not to take care of the students who parents have entrusted to it, but merely to make money, to keep the operations going. And then for the fact the girl's mother has gone to she's had the case at the time was with the FCT command, the FCT police command. There was a criminal investigation going on, and people going out hiring a PR agency to manage the narrative. Why is school going out and hiring a PR agency, an expensive PR agency, to manage narratives around the death of a student? Why are you doing that? What is your motive?
Right. David, will it be safe to say now that the schools are more concerned about making money than actually doing their primary responsibility of instilling morals?
Absolutely. It's very clear. Going to the Down College case, the case of Sylvester Oromon, this is a school where termly fees are in excess of 1 million naira. So a session of 3 terms, you're going to pay more than 3 million naira to send your child to the school. This school is not cheap, right? And yet something as basic as complete CCTV coverage across the boarding house, apparently the school didn't have it. So you have that it's for lack of money that the school didn't have this thing. It's not for lack of money, it's not for lack of resources, it's not for lack of ability that it didn't have these things. But it's simply the case that it is somebody's money-making machine. So run as cheaply as possible, make the fees as pricey as possible, so that you can profit from the spread. It's just a business, right? And one of the more disappointing things for me personally in the aftermath of all of this is that the conversation that I was hoping that this thing would spark, right, in terms of this culture that exists within the so-called elite Nigerian schools, because for a long time there's been a misconception that these problems don't exist at a certain level in Nigerian society. That if your child in school, you're paying 700,000, 1 million naira in term, then things like that sort of extreme bullying don't exist. Actually, they do, and I was hoping that this would spark conversation. Instead, what is that even within the parents' hall at Down College itself, I was reading a statement from an executive member of the parents' forum yesterday. Her name is Aitwa Scholar Oladijo. And she said, look, that people that we should withdraw our kids from this school, that I don't think this is the best thing to do at this time. That, the school is very good in academics. At this point, a child died. And what the federal parent is most concerned about is that we're not good in academics. My son is about to write IGCS.
Right, David. So, before we go into the parental aspect of it, you mentioned something about the school doing a good job hiring a PR agent to cover up the whole story. Why would they want to cover up the story? Whose integrity are they trying to protect? Is it that of the school or that of the parents?
It's obviously it's that of the school. So I have a background in marketing and PR. I used to work in PR before I segued into journalism. So I have quite a significant network within that space, which is how come I got to know what PR agency was hired and what their brief was. The brief of this PR agency was not just to strategically tamp down on the story, to make the story have as little impact as possible. It was also to strategically misdirect the inquiry of the journalists. So, for example, when the autopsy report came out, the autopsy report has still not been made public by the police, by the way. So when it came out and the police were playing games, and then for whatever reason, police allowed the school have access to the autopsy report, but didn't allow the girl's mother have access to the autopsy report. The story started coming out in the news then that Karen Hapu-Shafaga died of complications relating to diabetes. Right, which is a very clever misdirection, because it's like saying that I went and stabbed somebody and the person died, right? But you will now say that that person's cause of death is excessive blood loss, instead of saying that I stabbed the person, right? Because yes, technically, the cause of death was complications linked to diabetes, but those complications were complications that were as a result of sepsis. But meanwhile, we're feeding the media this narrative of diabetes. So if you check all the news reports from June to date that mention the cause of death, you will see diabetes. You will never see sepsis. So that's what the PR company was doing. So it's obvious that the school has hired them to protect its own reputation by inferring that this girl died of something that had nothing to do with them. So please stop mentioning our name.
All right. From David, from several implications now, we can see that negligence plays a big part in some of these stories. And then I want to know, in the area of licensing educational institutions to operate whether day or boarding system in secondary schools, what would you say is the responsibility of the government?
So this is a difficult question that you just asked, because normally the answer that I'm supposed to give is that there should be heightened regulation, there should be increased regulation. The government should be more stringent about the conditions that must be satisfied before such licenses are given out. However, in practice, we know that this being Nigeria, the last thing you want to do is give the government even more power than it already has, especially in a sector like education, which has been fundamentally and woefully mismanaged by the government. I mean, the very fact that these schools exist is itself an indictment on the government, that the very best schools in Nigeria are the schools that the government has nothing to do with, and that you have to pay through the nose to get into. This isn't the case elsewhere. In the UK, for example, the very best schools, your Eatons and your Harrows, are government-owned. They're not private. But in Nigeria, it's the other way around, because the government is that incompetent. So it's a very difficult question to answer. How do you ask an incompetent regulator to do better at regulation such that the private entities that is regulating do better at their job? That's the problem. There is no regulation, and the entity whose job it should be to do the regulation, your worry is even that you shouldn't even give that entity more power than it already has. You want that entity to stay out of the way as much as possible, which then gives the private entities such as Darwin College and Premier Academy free license to do what they want. And then as the parents, you're not at their mercy, and you have to hope that they do everything they do in good faith, that they actually care about your children and not just about the school fees that you're paying.
Okay, so David, so David, what you're trying to say in essence is that yes, the government has a role to play, but the parents also have their own role to play, and everyone has a role to play.
All right, many thanks for staying with us. You're still watching Report Desk Africa, and we're joined again by Mike Ekunno. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Mike.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
All right, glad
Mr.
to have
Mike,
you.
it's good to have you on the show finally. Now, of course, we're discussing bullying, and from record, you were part of some of the few parents that actually withdrew their children from school. In fact, you posted the letter you wrote to the school before withdrawing your child. Now, what about parents? We've talked about the government, we've talked about the school. What about parents? Don't they have a role to play in curbing bullying in the society? Because it is perceived as if it's a case of pushing their responsibility to the school.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Parents do have a role, and a big one at that, for curbing bullying in schools. Because for all you know, the senior students who are mostly the culprits in bullying, they are not given birth to by spirits, by ghosts. They have parents. And in some cases, you have parents who complain of their children being bullied, having seniors who are also bullying juniors in another school or in the same school. So it's a question of, at some point, definitely at some point, you must have a junior student. And it's the junior student that moves on to become a senior. So it's the same parent that has juniors that also have seniors. So what parents, it's the old, we have to come back to the old saying, do unto others as you would like them do unto you. So parents should not think, in so many occasions at PTA meetings, you find that the parents of seniors just remain unconcerned when bullying is being discussed, forgetting that those seniors were juniors at some point, and probably they still have children at home who will become juniors someday. So, and apart from that, the major motivation for bullying is the feeling that there will be no consequence. Whether you're talking of the school system or the larger society. So if parents begin to inculcate the values of, consequence, that there's consequence for good action and there's consequence for bad action, it will reduce the impunity with which some of these bullies operate. There's been a news report in blogs about how one of the bullies at Hundeyin, has been boasting about what his father can do and whom his father knows. If it is true, anyway, if such a boy does not get to hear such arrogant discussions within the family circle, he will not be in a position to boast and to use it as a support that my daddy is highly connected, nothing will come out.
Mr. Ekunno, just to pick on one of the points you mentioned now, that both the senior and the junior are owned by parents. You understand me? And some of when we visited the Hundeyin College, and some of the angry mothers that were there mentioned the fact that, in fact, the students, most of them are unruly and they can't be controlled. Now, would we also say the parents have a role to play in this? Yes, they've handed over their rights or their responsibility to the school now to do. What specifically should they do more? Because they spend almost half of their time in a day with the teachers rather than the parents.
Oh yeah, before they become boarding house students, they probably came from homes. And you're talking of the ages of from birth to maybe up to 10 years. So within that period, psychologists and child development experts will tell you that's when characters are formed. So, and those times they are mostly with their parents because there are not many boarding primary schools, and it has not become a common in our part of the country. So during primary school, you find that most boys and girls are at home and they are with the parents. So that's the time to begin to inculcate the values. And I call it consequence. It's just plain, having people pay for what they have done, whether it's at home or at school.
Right.
So at that.
Right. Okay, Mr. Ekunno, because of our time, let's. I'll stay on that. You mentioned consequences, but I want to bring David in at this point. David, let me bring you in at this point. Mr. Ekunno mentioned consequences. Now, the cases of Sylvester and Karen are the few cases of bullying that didn't fall through the crack. Now, there is a sign of hope in this case, as the House of Representatives has ordered Inspector General of Police to take up the investigation. But then it seems like there's a setback, because from what the school, Dowen College, released from their recent release, we see that they're still basing on the fact that the little boy was injured while playing football, and that negates what he said before he died. So how do you think that justice will be served in this case? Wouldn't all of this just be swept under the rug?
Well, I doubt that. The boys' parents, thankfully, are people of some means. They've hired a senior advocate of Nigeria, to act on their behalf. And the first thing, if you notice, the very first thing he did was he wrote to the Lagos State Chief Coroner requesting an autopsy report, because that is the central document that the entire case will hang on, basically. So once that autopsy document is made public and it emerges that the injuries that this kid died of were not football-related injuries, that these were injuries that could only have been had as a result of a violent attack, such as was described by the boy and by the kids around him, then the school doesn't have a leg to stand on. I think what Darwin College is doing is like a drowning man clutching onto straws, basically. They're trying to hang on to the very last minute, to deny all liability for as long as possible, and hoping that this will basically go away. However, and you also have to remember that whenever things like this happen in Nigeria, where there's a very clear and egregious case of a human rights violation or something egregious like this, and the perpetrators are people who are linked to power, or people who are linked to power have an interest in making it go away, what they tend to do is simply deny it and then string it out as long as possible, so as to frustrate the entities on the other side.
So that we can get results, apparently. Now, in 30 seconds, Mr. Ekunno, what will be your recommendations to help curb bullying? Now, not just in tertiary, but specifically in secondary schools, Nigerian secondary schools.
Yeah, these are children that are growing up and of impressionable ages, teenagers and what have you. In boarding secondary schools, the juniors should have an exclusive hostel to themselves, because most of the bullying takes place in the hostels, and that's where the masters, the tutors are not around. It's after school hours. So one, the juniors should be put in hostels where if it's GS1, it should be only GS1 and 2 students alone. Then among themselves, they can elect a house, a minder, a house prefect to supervise what goes on in the hostel and report to the housemaster. That's one. 2, housemasters and house mistresses. I get the impression that there's some allowance attached to that duty.
Right.
And they are mostly appointed from the more senior ones.
Okay, Mr. Ekunno, because of our time, thank you very much. Yeah. But because of our time, we'll have to call it a wrap now. But thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Ekunno. Thank you so much for joining us, David.
We appreciate you for taking our time to join us in this show. We would get more time later on to be able to discuss this further. Lessons. Now,
This is really a dicey situation.
It's a very dicey situation. So what should they look out for? What should parents look out for?
I think they should be more involved in their children's lives, right? So even if the children are in boarding school, they should see signs. If your children come home with bruises or injuries, or they just really are fidgety about their school, you should really look into that. So yes, that's all we have for you today on Report Desk Africa.
Report Desk Africa. Join us same time next week, 5:30 p.m. West African time, and we'll be certainly getting ready to give you more hot gist across Africa.
All right, thank you very much for joining us. My name is Blessings Mosugu.
And I am Ni Omani.
See you next week.
Bye.